Are processed food classification systems a trap for sugar addicts? Gang, I'm here with the esteemed expert, literally the author of the book, The Processed Food Addiction book. She wrote the book, Dr. Joan Ifland. And we're here to talk about one of the most, I don't say it's controversial, would you, Joan, that the Nova system is ascending as people are using it to figure out what they should eat. But if you're a sugar addict, this classification may not apply. Joan, I'm going to let you take it from here. We'll talk a little more, but you have an amazing discovery. I didn't know it yesterday when we talked, and so this is information the public needs.
Oh, Mike, I appreciate you so much. I had to go back and look at the original research myself to get my head wrapped around how just deceptive this is for food addicted people. The ultra processed trap is real. It means that if you buy into, oh, just giving up ultra processed foods, boom, the trap lowers and you are still trapped in the addiction and could be worse, could be much worse. So I've got, I went back into the research, got my evidence organized as usual.
Right.
I'm a researcher front to back. So I wonder if we could, well, let me just give an overview. What's the issue here?
Yeah.
The issue here is that the ultra-processed category came out of a food classification system called NOVA. So from some very good-hearted people at University of Sao Paulo in Brazil. And what they did was they took two sets of data. They took how much ultra-processed foods people are eating, and they took how sick people are. And they noticed a correlation. And they noticed that people who cook at home are less sick. So more ultra-processed foods, less cooked at home, more sick, less sick. Now, that's fine. You can do that kind of data, but here's the big mistake that they made is they tried to assign causation. So they tried to say that it's the cooking at home that caused people to be less sick. And it's the purchasing in stores of these ultra processed industrial foods that make people sick. That's a colossal mistake. Because when they said, oh, look, people eating at home are less sick, so it must be eating at home. And they actually, in their research, they published these kinds of statements where if you make things at home, even if they include sugar and flour, and they're explicit, if you make soups and stews and salads and bread and preserves and drinks and desserts at home, it's okay. In fact, it's healthy because look, people who cook at home, look how much healthier they are. So it's a colossal mistake. But to their credit, I will say, in none of their published research that I could find, do they say, oh, and our system applies to food addiction. So as long as we know not to apply that system to food addiction, we're good, we're safe. And I'm going to show you the research today for why making desserts, bread, preserves, and drinks at home is a disaster.
Yeah, this was what I didn't know yesterday. And the Nova system has been, and look, I think I applaud, like you said, everything they've done. I think they're really working hard to get the general public educated on ultra processed foods, and they've set a classification of 4 different groups of between homemade or good, stuff that's real food all the way to ultra processed. It's a great process, but for addicts, for sugar addicts, or people struggling with food addiction, they just well, you're going to show the sentence that's actually in the research about the making it at home, and it's just not logical, or it's not possible, genuinely not possible, for a true sugar addict to be able to have this stuff at home, cook at home, or it doesn't make any dang difference. You know what I mean? But
You
anyway,
know what it's like? It's like low tar cigarettes. So the tobacco industry came up with low tar cigarettes, and this is where they got into trouble, by the way.
okay.
It was claiming that low tar cigarettes are healthier than regular cigarettes. It wasn't true. When you inhale low tar cigarette smoke, you have to hold it longer,
Mm,
inhale it more deeply to get the nicotine out of it.
mhm.
And while it's down there, it's laying down more tar in your lungs. So this is very similar.
Yeah.
They're actually, I'm going to show you some evidence, the research showing that making bread or desserts at home is more dangerous
Mm,
than just running into a grocery store and picking up some ultra processed foods
right.
because of the triggering.
Yeah. Show them the line. I think that's the part that's in their system, in their classification system. There's an exact quote you have, which is amazing, actually. It makes me
Yeah.
crazy a little bit. I mean, the first thing we tell people is to clean out the house, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the first, that's literally job one if you want to get off of this stuff.
There it is. It's the first line. I've got a number of points, and please jump in with your thoughts as I go through this.
Yeah, yeah.
The ultra processed food category excludes addictive sugar, flour, and sugar combinations used at home. And here's the quote: to make bread, preserves, drinks, and desserts. This is in an article that the founder of the Nova System, the leader is Carlos Monteiro. He's a good guy,
Yeah,
but
no.
he doesn't understand addiction. And fortunately, he didn't claim to understand addiction. And so he's reporting the data. Look, people who cook at home are less sick.
Mm,
So that's,
yep.
if you just stopped there, it would have been fine. But to say somehow that cooking at home is the reason people are less sick. So here we go.
Yeah.
The recommendations for home cooking overlooks the craving triggers of the smell. So when I say, oh, low tar cigarettes are worse than regular cigarettes, making this stuff at home is worse than buying it in the store. And
Mm,
that's really something that's hard for me to say, but I follow the research.
right.
The recommendations for home cooking overlooks the trigger that comes from having the smell of the cooking in the home. And
Mm,
this study that I'm citing here, it's specifically about the smell of bread, baked bread. And
right.
the research showed that when people were exposed to the smell of bread, they did more food seeking.
Mhm. Yeah, I think
Okay.
it bears repeating that, look, I mean, there's now probably 1,000 quit sugar, reduce the white stuff programs out there on the marketplace. And 95% of them, the first step is to get the stuff out of your house so that you're not tempted. Uh,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just, it's just too difficult. The stuff talks to you from the cupboard or the kitchen, from the
Oh my
refrigerator.
gosh. Chef AJ has this great
It's
phrase:
hilarious, right?
if it's in my house, it's in my mouth.
I love it. And that's so
Yeah.
true. And that's one of the steps. And look, do you have to do it forever? Who knows? Maybe, but
Well, I mean,
you
once
have
you
to,
get
you have,
how
you have to break it.
destructive
Yeah, you have
these,
to break the cycle, you know?
yeah, like once you get how destructive these substances are, you don't want to be
No,
anywhere near them. It's like cigarette smoke.
right.
Like if you actually were able to quit smoking, the last place you want to smoke is around your family, in
Right.
your house.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's another kind of trigger. There's a smell trigger, and then there's something called a place trigger.
Mm,
And if you do something in a place, like if you smoke in a place or you drink in a place, and you go back to that place, the
mm.
place itself will trigger cravings.
Yeah.
So if you make these things at home, you're turning your home into a place trigger. You go home, your brain's going to think, oh yeah, this is where we get
The stuff. It's like
desserts.
hanging out at your local bar that you used to hang out with, like with your friends and trying to quit drinking. It doesn't work, you know?
Yes, it's like turning your home into a bar and you're an alcoholic.
Right.
All right. So let's look at the next one. Cravings have been shown to be more intense in the dining room, kitchen, and bedroom than elsewhere. So increasing availability triggers. I mean, you got to store the ingredients. If you're
Mhm.
making bread at home, then you've got flour in your house, you're making desserts at home, you've got sugar in your house. And this is triggering cravings.
How
That's
many people have
just
you talked to that want to get off sugar who eat the little chocolate things for the cookies right straight out of the bag? They're not, they're,
chocolate chips. I
they're,
did that as a kid.
they can't have a candy bar. They got everything out of the house except those little
Chocolate chips.
chocolate chips. Yeah, it's crazy.
Okay. Storing ingredients at home could be a craving and use stimulus. This is a study, it's a great one, showing that if the closer the food is to you, proximity, the more likely you are to eat it. So having this stuff in your house is a cravings trigger. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now we go into some other interpretations of that NOVA data. So I ran a little survey out in my Facebook group, Food Addiction Education, the other day to ask people why they don't cook at home.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what the biggest reason was? It's being tired.
Mm-hmm.
So as you know, we've been under this terrible addiction business model, the tobacco food addiction business model since the mid 1980s. So we're getting close to 40 years when tobacco, R.J. Reynolds and Philip Morris bought Kraft, Nabisco, and General Foods, and they brought the addiction business model to processed foods. Now, processed foods are incredibly destructive. They create disabilities. They make people tired. And so as time has gone on over these 40 years, and more people have gotten more sick and more tired, the increase in not cooking at home has come from the consequences of that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the causality is I buy more ultra convenient, ultra processed foods because I'm too tired and sick and brain fogged to cook at home. But it doesn't mean that sugar is less destructive at home. As we're seeing, it could be even more destructive.
Right.
So
Yeah, this is
this
a
is this is a study showing that increased ultra-processed consumption is associated with disease more so than foods made at home from sugar and flour, even though they have similar addictive properties. Okay. Nova does not, they don't, this is clear. If you look at Monteiro wrote kind of an umbrella review of what he's doing in 2018, and he does not claim to that his system can be applied to food addiction. I think that's really important.
yeah.
Then
We're not here to slam them. You know, I think, like I said, they're doing a great job. But and I think you got it on number 8 too, is that people don't realize. The general public does not realize the attack or the correlation to the substance use disorder model as you have right there.
yeah,
So you have it in number 8.
yeah. So that's another misconception that somehow now ultra processed foods contain a tremendous number of industrial ingredients.
Right.
These are, and he does a great job of defining what those are. They are plants or they're food sources that have been so processed that it's now they're an industrial ingredient. They don't bear any resemblance to a food. And I think that's fair. But if you try to say, well, that's the problem, it's the industrial ingredients, then you're missing all of the evidence that using sugar and flour is just plain old harmful, no matter how you use it. So if you try to say that making a dessert at home is harm reduction because it doesn't have all these additives, that's just not consistent with the research showing that sugar is more addictive than cocaine. And it it activates these craving pathways in the brain. Flour is a high glycemic food that's associated with loss of control. So the harm reduction argument for making this stuff at home is more than canceled out by the increase in craving stimulation from making these things at home. And so harm reduction does not work.
Mm.
And then there's just one other point, which is this one researcher went out of their way to show that people are using this category in different ways. And they're including and excluding different things from the category. So there's no consistency there.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. It really is. I mean, as far as harm reduction, like you and I talked about yesterday, I mean, any amount of reduction in a home is a win, but we are arguing, I think, for this idea that if you feel you have a real difficulty, maybe an addiction to sugar, flour, or processed foods, you really do need a special type of treatment, a special type of recovery, of change, of transformational process that is not just the food. Triggers are real. Place triggers are real. All these things that would trigger you to use again until you get some distance from these things and I call it heal, until you heal a little bit for 3 or 4 months without it, with abstinence, so you can decide, let your body decide whether or not you want to re-ingest. And one of the principles, as I've mentioned many times, is that, you cannot do this at home because you can't have this product in your home in the early days. Now, look, I think I have a chocolate bar that somebody sent me in a gift package sitting in my refrigerator for a year now. I don't know why it's still sitting there. But after a while, you may be able to have it around. But at the beginning, it's just too hard. I mean, it's defeatist, you know what I mean?
Well, the thing about having something in your house is you could go on for months and months and months, not even thinking about it. But if you happen on a bad day so stress triggers cravings.
Right.
A
Right.
lot of things can trigger cravings. And that means that now your brain is being flooded with these craving neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, cannabinoid, and opioid. That will shut down your frontal lobe.
Right.
And now the cravings, now the addiction is in charge. It can go right over to your behavior centers and control them. And maybe that dessert that was frozen in the back corner of the freezer way down in the basement because your husband wanted to keep it there.
You'll dig it up.
You'll do the zombie walk. You'll do
Right.
the zombie walk. Your frontal lobe might be saying, no, 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 but the midbrain is saying, today's the day we're gonna go eat that. It's just the way addictions work. You want that time, you want at least a few minutes for that flood to subside, like the tsunami to go back out, and your frontal lobe to come back online again. You need that time.
Yeah.
So that's why it's not in my house.
Yeah. No, I think you're onto something. I mean, I'm really glad that you found this literature because I think the ascension of this one classification system is literally traveling all over the world and people are using it. So I don't know that they're reading that deeply into it like you did, because I think I skimmed it back in the day, but I never saw that. I never
Yeah.
saw that. I would have said something earlier or, gave you a call if I saw that, but that's kind of crazy, really.
Yeah, you can't, it's just, addictions are, you've deeply studied them over 40 years. I've deeply studied them over 28 years. It's like the big book says, they are cunning, powerful, and baffling. I would say they're no longer baffling. We know exactly
Right.
because we have the brain imaging equipment that they didn't have in the 1930s when that was written. We know exactly. You provoke a trained pathway enough, it will flood the brain,
Yeah.
will shut down the frontal lobe, you lose rational thought, and that is not your fault.
Yeah. So you mentioned stress, people don't realize two things. One, that they're operating on a brain that was probably programmed when they're, 5, 6, 7,
In
8 years old.
utero, at conception.
Probably a
For
conception.
me, the food addiction genes were turned on.
Right.
The genes I inherited from my parents, for
Yeah,
sure.
so when they get stressed, they're gonna, they're like you say, you describe what happens in the brain. The brain's not all that smart. If you've trained it over years to get its dopamine via sugar, that's what it's going to go to. It's not going to run
It's
out.
numbing. It's
Yeah.
numbing.
It's going to numb you out a
It's
little bit.
numbing. I mean, you have some kind of pain, you turn to sugar or flour or dairy or excessive fat or excessive
Right.
salt or caffeine to get that numbing effect.
Right.
And then it drops you off lower than where you started. It's incredibly deceptive.
Exactly. And the second part is nobody wants to be an addict and no one wants to describe it. It's like the last resort when they're 100 pounds overweight or got a type 2 diabetes. Then they finally say, well, maybe, and then they're willing to at least look at the solution. And the parallels now for me have been so amazing to substance use disorder after dealing with alcoholics and addicts for the first 20 years of my career, that I know for a fact because of its ubiquity, because sugar and flour are so available and so still, like, you can give it to a baby without any worries. People just don't want to believe that they need this intensive of transformation process, this much work, this much change, get it all out of the house, all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
we're just getting the public educated has been such a momentous task.
Yeah. Yeah. But Mike, you've been on it. You've been on it. You've done a great job with the Quit Sugar Summit, and I'm supporting
I
you as
the
best I
labor of
can
love.
with giving you the research that you can stand on.
Well, in the last 3 to 5 years, the research about exactly what you're talking about, the brain has exploded. I mean, really in-depth books published, Harvard folks, Dr. Eden, Chris Palmer, we're starting to know that what you just described that's going on in the brain is
Hmm.
happening. I
Hmm.
don't care if you're 5 years old or 55 years old, it's
Hmm.
happening the
Or if
same
you're
way.
a newborn,
Yeah, those neural pathways are grooved and they're going to follow, your brain is going to follow that way of doing it. And it's not going to care that are overweight or whatever.
people have to understand that there are scientists at the processed food industry, just like there were scientists at the tobacco industry, who are working night and day to, their goal is to create that flood of cravings. Their goal is to shut down your frontal lobe. They want to separate you from your rational thought so that they can dominate your behavior.
Yeah.
It's just a battle. It's between the frontal lobe, which is this little teeny tiny part of the brain, and this massive midbrain.
Right.
The frontal lobe is only 200,000 years old. It's about 2% of the brain. The midbrain has been with us for 3.5 million years. The food-seeking brain, the primitive brain, has been with us for about 7 million years.
Yeah.
Those parts of the brain, you wake them up, they will win. Your fault.
You trained them how to get their dopamine. And when I use the word dopamine, I mean dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, GABA, like all of the brain body reward chemicals. Dopamine just happens to be hot right now, so I use it as a catch-all.
Dopamine nation. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so exciting. I mean, again, I mean, the reason we're doing this video is to try and get this information out and cleave it apart so that the public doesn't have to write a book like you and have how many citations,
2000. The textbook,
2,000
we're talking
citations.
about the textbook.
Yeah, they don't have to like dive into the research. We can hopefully bring the information to them in
Bring it to them.
simple terms. Yeah, no, super exciting stuff.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah,
Thank
Joan, I really appreciate it. This is, I think, a message that we need to get out to the public, and I really appreciate you spending a few minutes with us.
Well, I appreciate that you've developed these channels, you've developed the following. You're in it to win it. And I'm humbled and honored to walk with you.
We're gonna get the information out whether they like it or no, just.
Well, I mean, there's so much hope. You listen to something like this, just these few minutes.
Right.
Even if you didn't know anything about ultra processed foods, you do know that now there is a way out.
Yeah.
And Mike is great at the queuing issues. You know, why do you get it out of your house? I know that coming home, I've just come home from traveling, being in a space where there's nothing bad, I feel so much more secure,
Yeah.
relaxed. Like now I can get on with my life. I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to think about it. It's just I'm safe in my home
Right.
from the food processors, and then the queuing. Like if there's research showing that television excites cravings. And you
Mm.
just learn gradually over time that you don't want the magazines with the lurid pictures of processed foods on the cover. And you don't want those in your house either.
Yeah.
They're all different kinds of triggers, but we know now. We know the researchers, we owe them so much. They make things very clear.
But we have the practical knowledge too. We've done over 20,000 sugar detoxes, not curing everyone of sugar addiction, but they've all attempted to quit sugar, right? Or
Mhm.
flour, whatever. And if it's in the house, they fail. Period. End of story. Okay. It's a fact. It's not like a fallacy. This is proven over time.
And you see why. There's the research.
Yeah.
It's not because you're weak. It's not because you should be able to withstand it. It's
No.
because when there is an addictive substance in your proximity, whether you like it or, whether you're aware of it, it is triggering at least a
Yeah.
trickle of dopamine that will build up over time.
Right.
It's not your fault, and it's not something, you see these support groups. Well, you should, if you had enough willpower, you'd be able to. No, that's not true. Or
Not
they'll
a
say,
willpower.
well, everybody else in your house should have the right to keep XYZ there. It's like, no, no, that's not, they have to put it in the trunk of their car. They have to lock the car. They have to keep the keys in their pocket.
Right.
Everybody in a household is absolutely, you can absolutely ask them to protect you from cravings in the house. It's a great theme.
Mm.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pain out there. Like people, I take these calls for sugar addiction coaching, right? 20% of the people are crying and they are horrified, or they think they're horrified, or they're horrifying me by telling me the story of throwing the cake in the garbage and then pouring dishwashing
And
liquid on it. And then an hour later, cutting the dishwashing liquid off and eating the cake. And I'm like, I've heard that story 50 times.
1,000 times, yeah.
Yeah. So it's
You have to
like,
use bleach.
yeah,
Bleach
it's
something
in the
that's
house.
gonna soak all the way through, or put it in the disposal.
Right. Joan, it's always a pleasure, and we will talk real soon about this again. Hopefully we don't stir up too much controversy, but we got to tell the truth, right?
Thank you, Mike.
All
Thank
right.
you from the bottom of my heart.
All right, you take care.
You too.